Welcome to Essential Estate Experts, the estate planning podcast and ultimate resource for understanding estate planning and elder law, brought to you by Screenfire Media. Let's get started.
Hey there, folks. Chuck here, and welcome to Essential Estate Experts, where we break down the myths and misconceptions that come with legacy planning, estate planning, succession, trusts, probate, all that stuff. And we are so glad you're here today. Remember, if you're watching this on YouTube, please hit the like, subscribe, share, ring the bell, all that good stuff. It really helps spread word about the show. And if you're listening to us on your favorite podcasting app, be sure to rate us 5 stars. Okay, before we get too far, first a reminder that on these podcasts, we invite guests to express interesting and unique opinions on estate issues, and this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Neither Essential Estate Experts nor Screenfire Media makes any specific endorsement on financial products or recommendations on legal issues. Please consult your own qualified financial or legal advisors before taking any actions. All right, now that we got all that paperwork out of the way, I'm going to introduce my co-host, Mr. Mark Zasada. How you doing today, Mark?
Thanks, Chuck. I'm doing great. I'm looking forward to a very different estate planning show today. Here's our subject. What happens when farmers want to pass on their land and farming legacy to the next generation, but some or all of their kids aren't farmers? We're going to talk about an innovative solution that I think has actually wide implications for American agriculture.
Before I get too much further into that, I'm going to introduce my guest. His name is Lance Weaver. He's the Director of Business Development for Sower Legacy Farmland Fund. Lance, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Chuck. How about yourself?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks so much for asking. And we are going to be talking about what Sower is, and that's S-O-W-E-R, by the way, for people listening. There will be a link in the show notes if you want to check them out further. But before we get too much further into that, Lance, you've got a unique story when it comes to getting into this line of work. So let's talk a little bit about what Sower is and how you ended up working with them.
Well, Sower Investments is a larger investment company, and they've been involved in a lot of different things over the years. Kind of seeing where the market's going, they decided that they need to really get heavily invested in an inflation-proof investment, which is historically farmland has been a good inflation hedge, and they developed the Legacy Farmland Fund, which is a one-of-a-kind, first-to-market type fund where farmers can contribute their farmland in exchange for shares in the fund. My background is primarily in banking. I spent the last 11 years in ag banking. I've been in Texas and Oklahoma. I've lended in 7 different states, had a little bit of international experience at one point. I grew up in Levelland, Texas, out in the Texas Panhandle. Out there's a lot of row crop farmers, specifically cotton farmers, and oil field. That's primarily what drives that economy. Grew up in that. My family wasn't directly involved in farming. We had farms, but I grew up in a real estate brokerage, went off to college. I got my undergraduate in agricultural business from Sam Houston State. I got my master's in agricultural economics at Oklahoma State. That's where I met my wife. Ultimately, in a long roundabout story, we ended up back here in Northwest Arkansas, where I reside, and we are growing our family as we speak. So it's a wonderful time in life, and it's a great time to be involved in agriculture.
So this isn't just a job for you. This is something that you have personal connection and passion for.
Absolutely. This goes back to my days growing up in a small West Texas town, and being able to give back to people that I felt like gave so much to our economy and our everyday life means a whole lot to me.
Well, that's fabulous. I want to jump in, Chuck, and say this show should be of great interest to anyone who owns farmland, especially family farmland. But it also touches on a growing asset class involved in 721 transfers. And investment people out there will know what I'm talking about. But if you don't know what I'm talking about, you'll learn something very important about that today. These are funds that are being created through 721 transfers of real estate assets. It also touches on kind of the larger issues of agriculture in America today and the transitions that are happening. And that's really where I'd like to start, Lance, is what's the overall landscape that your fund is working in the world of agriculture?
Succession planning is been something that's been talked about a lot in the agricultural industry, at least for the last 20 years. And there hasn't been a whole lot of proactiveness by most of the farmers. And I got kind of a firsthand or front row seat to this whenever I was banking for so many years. And what we're seeing now is that the average age of the farmer has continued to increase every year. And the problem with agriculture is it's not like a lot of other businesses. If a farm goes out of business, the barriers to entry are extremely high. You have equipment, you have land, you have operating capital, all of those things. If you were to go out and buy, especially in today's market, at 8-9% interest rates, would be just cost prohibitive. There's no way you could ever make a living doing it. So when you look at what we're doing here at Legacy was designed as a 721 asset exchange, just like you had just mentioned, where we can take these contributions in and give them shares. Now, the benefit of that is that they don't have to pay capital gains initially. Well, kind of diving a little deeper why that's important. Whenever these farmers that are 70 years old inherited this land, it came in and it was inherited at a fraction of the price that it is worth today. With urban sprawl and the increased demand for food worldwide, the price of this land just in the last 10 years has gone from somewhere around $4,000 an acre on average to $10,000 an acre. If they were to sell that land outright, capital gains would pretty much take away almost everything that they've built up over a lifetime of farming. So having this fund where you can contribute, put in a safe place, distribute it in shares to potential multiple heirs is a really good avenue of dealing with the succession problem that are on a lot of these farms.
So let's start with a real world hypothetical.
Sure.
You know, I'm Jake. I'm 70 years old. I've been farming my whole life. I have 3 kids. Not all 3 kids want to be farmers. And I'm trying to figure out how to retire. I'm trying to figure out how to continue my legacy in farming. Is that a typical situation? And how could you help me?
Absolutely. And I'm going to add a little bit more to that example. This is a 3rd, 4th generation farm with a lot of sentimental value. We got 3 kids, and one of them is in the area and likes to be at the farm, likes to hunt, does a little farming with his dad, those type of things. The 2 others have moved off to the city. Well, the nice thing about what we've got set up here, in addition to the obvious 721 exchange, what you get, we have a lot of flexibility built into this fund. So whenever you bring a farm in, we can do things such as build in first right of refusals if the fund decides to sell it. We can build in first right to lease if they want to lease it back. And we can hold back hunting rights or anything else that the family feels is important. And when we take that farm in, we take it in the family's name. So if it's Chuck's farm, for instance, it would be Ellis Farms LLC would be coming into Sower Farmland. And if we end up ever potentially selling it, we don't sell it off in pieces. It sells as a whole unit. So the farm stays intact. If you want to farm it, you can continue farming it for the rest of your life if that's what we want to build into this. It all kind of goes into the equation of how it comes in. And then to speak about the ones that have moved off the farm, once that primary principal passes away, all 3 kids have their own equal pot of shares within that land of value. We have capital contributors that have set up that if they want to sell their shares, they can sell their shares at that point, and it doesn't affect what's going on with the other heirs. Kind of keeps everybody in a stable environment. It eliminates the family feuds because from my past, I've seen a lot of situations where we get to the end of the road. The primary landowner dies, and the family starts getting in arguments about how, what, when, and where the land is supposed to be doing. And then there's lawyers that get introduced. And once you introduce lawyers to fight against your siblings, those relationships are never the same ever again. And so really getting at the heart of the issue, if we're able to preserve these families, keep this land farmed, the vision statement that we have proposed for this fund is keeping farms farmed. That is extremely important to that family, and it's extremely important to the global situation that we have in food as well. And so that's where the mission of what we're trying to do ultimately lands.
So let me again back up a little bit. I'm Jake. I'm 70 years old. I want to stop farming. I could sell my farm to someone else, another small family farmer. Could I sell it to a big agribusiness that would just completely take it over? Is that an option? And this is, to me, maybe a third option. And you're nodding your head, so you got to tell me I'm on the right track here. The third
You are.
option is I go to your fund. I transfer the property into your fund, and then I own shares of the larger fund. So I'm owning shares of multiple farms around America,
Got it.
right?
Yes.
And
Yes, sir.
you take over operation of the farm. You're actually managing the farm.
Yes, we can facilitate that. Let's say that Jake wants to retire and we pay a dividend based on those shares. So, and that dividend is going to vary depending on the fund performance, obviously. So getting into numbers is not really something that is all that important at this moment. But what it does allow is once you transfer in there, is you are still invested in one of the greatest assets that you can be invested in right now in this economy, because we fully expect the value, and most people do, the value of farmland to continue to appreciate. So whenever you contribute, you are still invested in farmland and you're getting a dividend. We can find you somebody to lease that farm. We use a third party farm management service, Farmers National, based out of Omaha, and they've been around for a long time, have a lot of experience. Honestly, if the farmer wants to farm it back, we can do that. We talked about that. And a lot of them want to continue, but there are the situations like Jake that wants to retire, leave, and do his own thing, go fishing, go spend time with his grandkids. That is absolutely a possibility under the design of this fund.
I see. So there's a lot of flexibility there. Who's going to actually manage and run the farm? It could still be me running the farm and but the actual ownership now is within the larger fund. So I'm also transferring risk to the fund in actually running the farm, right?
Absolutely.
So, yeah. So I'm transferring risk. I'm avoiding capital gains of selling to someone else. And I'm allowing for the asset to be distributed among my 3 children in a way that's going to avoid arguments, hopefully, in the future. Is that a pretty good summary? But I could run it. Or you will find someone to run it, the farm.
That's right.
That's
right.
As a tenant.
It's kind of like everybody. I'm just going to say everybody likes cake, but they all like different types of cake, and what ingredients go in it. It just is really up to that preference of that individual. It's like we're making an individual type of meal or type of cake for each and every person that comes into this fund. And everybody's got their own needs, their own wants, their own desires, and their own hesitations. But ultimately, you hit on something that I want to point out is that when you come into the fund, you're transferring the individual risk that goes along with running that single farm to the whole fund. And with us having farms across the United States of America, then if something happens geographically that affects Jake's farm and wipes that crop out, it does not make it to where the fund itself cannot pay a dividend, because typically what happens in agriculture, geographic risk is very isolated. We have one area of the country that's not doing well, another area is. And so it works together to smooth out those returns and mitigate both the geography risk and the crop mix risk involved in farming.
Another thing I noticed in your materials is that if I wanted to, or if one of my kids wanted to take the farm back, that's actually possible in this arrangement?
If we decide to sell it, it'd have to be one of those that the fund decides to sell it. We can build in a future first right of refusal. So let's say one of the kids wants to bring it back into the family and we decide to sell it, they will have the first option to buy it back.
Okay. But does the farm retain its individual identity? Because I'm sure that's very important to many of these families.
Absolutely. The example I illustrated earlier, let's just talk about Jake. I don't know Jake's last name, so we're going to use Jake. Jake Farm LLC comes into the fund, and it comes in as a unit together, and it's treated as Jake Farm LLC. The performance of Jake Farm LLC goes along with Chuck Ellis Farm LLC, Mark LLC, all of those others pull back in to dictate the performance of the fund.
Got it. Okay. This is a complicated thing. It takes some explaining, that's for sure. And I'm sure that everybody doesn't necessarily grasp the concept the first time you explain it to them. So you'll have to forgive me on that one.
I got a question for you since we talked about you're looking at some new farms. I'm curious because I'm sure that, you've got to be smart on your side too when it comes to the farms that you acquire and invest in. So, you don't end up picking up a farm that is in extreme dire straits and will drag the rest of the fund down. So what strategies go into place and what due diligence processes do you guys follow for an acquisition?
So we usually gather some financial information based on what the farm's done in the past. We also look at the productivity of the land. There's usually a productivity index you can assign. If it is water dependent, like groundwater dependent, that's something that we definitely put a lot of emphasis on. Is what does the groundwater resources look like? What's the age of the infrastructure that's on place that deliver those that water out to the crop? All of those type of things. So it's a fairly involved process. And what we're trying to do is project out that what we've got here is an asset that's not only stable, it's sustainable going forward based on all of these type of factors.
One thing I'm curious about is liquidity. I'm transferring my property into this fund. I'm getting shares. They're called shares. They're called units, right? Not
Units.
shares.
Mm-hmm.
I get units. Am I able to sell those units to other people?
So you can't just go out and sell your units to anybody else, but we do have capital contributors set up ready to buy those. So you do have the ability, they are liquid. That kind of gets back to the estate planning side too. So if you have $1 million property that's been broken up into $1,000 shares, that allows your estate planners, your CPAs to decide how, if they want to get out of that property, how to get it out while minimizing the tax burden that's involved with the basis effect. So you can sell them in blocks over multiple years if you want to get out that way, back to the capital contributors. That's another estate planning tool. If they want liquidity. Now, from a banker's perspective, where I spent a large portion of my career, this is kind of exciting because you take a long-term asset that's really hard to get any type of equity out without borrowing against it or selling it. You move it from the bottom of the balance sheet to the top of the balance sheet, and now you have a liquid asset. So farms in general, you would see no matter where you're at, East Coast, West Coast, Central United States, do not usually have just a tremendous amount of liquidity. And so the fact that you're taking the best asset that they have in land and you're converting it to a liquid asset is somewhat foreign to farm economics. And it's kind of a fun thing to think about because it's not something that we've ever had the chance to deal with before.
I mean, if I own farmland, how does it become a liquid asset is, I'm sure, an enormous issue for anyone. So this is a path to that. It's a clear path to that. You mentioned a broad portfolio. So you're not just dealing with like row crops, or what kind of farms are you investing in or coming into the fund? I guess investing is not necessarily the right word.
No, this fund is very row crop specific at this point.
Okay.
And so we can take in some other things if there's some forest land or timberland or small vineyard or something, but the majority of the income needs to be coming from row crops, how the fund's designed, how it's set up. We may look at things down the road if there's opportunities to put up wind towers and the original owner doesn't have any clause built into the agreement that prevents that. We may look at putting in some additional revenue streams there or revenue streams on the solar to improve the overall dividend outlook. But that's kind of a case-by-case scenario. What this really is driven off of is row crops. We want to keep that land being farmed as row crop land because that's where the inflation hedge is for this particular fund.
I see. And you also are experts in controlling the risk around that, I imagine, as opposed to some other assets.
Well, and I would say that that's where our background is. I've got a counterpart, Ethan Branscombe, who is down in Little Rock. He's the director of acquisitions. He has a master's in Ag Econ as well. And Ag Econ's all designed around agricultural risk is really what it is, and managing the risk and your flow of resources. And so I would say that that's our training, that's our upbringing, that's our background. And so you don't want to be a self-proclaimed expert, but if you're calling us that, absolutely. We kind of we know what we're doing.
I mean, that's important to me if I'm, as Jake, contributing my land into your fund.
We want to take care of Jake and his family for sure.
Lance, looking at this as an investor, this is all really interesting, but can you talk a little bit more about how me as an outsider investing in farmland can, help me as an investor diversify my portfolio, hedge against inflation, and what kind of risk management strategies are in place?
Well, I think any investment that you get in, and getting back to your disclaimer, always talk to your professionals and all that other stuff. But any investment you get in, you really need to know a little bit about the investment before you get in. And farmland itself, you can make the claim that that's the oldest human profession, and we're always going to need to eat, right? And back in school, they want to talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is what they'll talk about in business class, where you've got your physiological needs, which is your very basic, most inelastic, meaning people are always going to buy them, needs at the bottom, and then self-actualization, which is at the top, status and causes. Well, really and truly, the two most perfectly inelastic goods, meaning that people are always going to buy them no matter what, is water and food. We're always going to be buying water and food. So that when you talk about inflation hedge, that's why it's the inflation hedge. It's because no matter what happens in this economy, people are always going to be looking for something that's stable. Farmland has proven to be stable over generations. Through centuries and centuries of mankind, people are always fighting over the land. We think technology is really important. People talk about how inelastic gasoline is. If it came down to choosing between buying food and driving somewhere, I'm going to buy food. And so that's why when you want to get down to the basics of why we call it an inflation hedge, why it is an inflation hedge, is the demand will always be there. With urban sprawl, a growing world population, and you look at the United States of America, we were kind of talking about this at one point, over 70% of the world's food exports come from the United States of America. We have the most valuable and reliable food system in the entire world. We have competitors, no doubt. We have competitors in China, we have competitors in Brazil, but there's things that separate us in terms of farm technology, infrastructure, and honestly, the history that we have in this country of being a farming country. And so when you look at our ground and where it sits in the scheme of investments, if somebody really wants to park some money and really wants to be in a place where it's safe, you don't really have to worry about losing everything you got. Farmland's it. I had an uncle who was an ag banker when I was growing up. He used to always have these isms about him. And then he asked me one day, he said, well, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I said, well, I don't really know. He said, well, what do you want to have? And I said, I don't really know. This is when I was about 10 years old. He said, well, let me tell you something, son. He said, the guy that owns the land will always be the guy that's in control. If you go buy stocks on Wall Street and then that stock disappears or that company disappears, all you have is paper. Even if the world completely craters and the value of that land is zero, which has never happened, but it would, you said you still have land. And there's something to be said about that. And that's kind of something that's always been resonated in my heart and how I go about things. And I appreciate the stewards of the land because, these guys, you want to look at it, and I don't want to get too sentimental, but the American farmer's been under attack by consumers. We've had people claiming that they're poisoning the world with pesticides and all of these different things and GMOs, but the reality is there's very, very little fact or knowledge behind that. And these people, like everybody else, are trying to make a living, and nobody wants to poison anybody. People are doing what they're supposed to do within the rules that have been laid out by the game. So, there's a soft spot in my heart for that kind of stuff. There's a soft spot in my heart for American farmland and the farmer himself, which is really what gets me up and going every day.
Well said.
Chuck mentioned investing in this fund, but he's not a farmer. He doesn't have land. Are non-landowners Is this fund available for that investment? But I understand Sower also has other funds. Can you explain that?
Yeah. Yes. No, this is not available for people who don't have land. This is a landowner fund. And so to get in, you have to have land to contribute, and it has to be accepted by the fund. We do have other funds out there. We have a sister fund, the Sower Farmland Fund. It's more of your traditional buying this land that comes up where there's good opportunities. They invest in it, they improve it, which also pays, a dividend based on the performance of the fund. But it's a completely different type of financial vehicle altogether.
Okay. Is that like a REIT?
Similar, it behaves similar. And it's just more of a fund though.
Lance, now that we understand the investment side of this and who can contribute and all that, can you elaborate a little bit on the concept of Legacy Farmland Trust and how it offers like a tax advantage divestiture option for farmland owners?
Yes, absolutely. And I think, I don't want anybody to walk away. There's obviously a level of complication in anything you do in life. The only reason that this may be perceived as complicated is because it's new. When it comes right down to it, that a farmer will take his farmland asset and he will sign up for an application to contribute his farmland. In return, he gets shares. Those shares are in his holdings and he owns part of the fund, is how it works. Ultimately, it's that simple. The fund performance is based on the value of farmland and how well crops do in the United States.
I'm going to go out on a limb to explain a little bit that basically my understanding of the law is that the IRS section 721 allows that if you transfer land into a partnership, that does not constitute a transfer of ownership because you are a partner in the new concern. Hence, you don't have to pay capital gains tax. This is my non-legal, I'm not a CPA, I'm not a lawyer. That's my understanding of what allows funds like this to exist and why they make sense from a tax perspective. And you don't have to say yes because I don't want you to go out and live. That's my understanding for the audience.
No, and that's how it's been explained to me. I know there's going to be some of my fund managers be like, hey, man, stay in your lane kind of thing.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. So I would just say that anyone considering something like this needs to talk to a professional, a licensed CPA, perhaps a tax attorney, and really get it straight. Again, don't take the word from a podcast.
And we do have professionals set up that if the CPAs or the attorneys have questions, they can get a hold of me and I can get them in touch with the people that can help them guide them through that are legally capable of answering those questions.
Got it. Okay. I think we did enough disclaimers there, even for the lawyers. Let me ask you, do you end up talking mostly to farmers directly or to their investment advisors or their estate planners? Who are the people that you end up talking to most about this?
Well, I feel like the whole industry needs to know about it. So we talk to all of them. And honestly, there's a fair amount of time spent with estate planners, financial planners, CPAs, and attorneys. But we also try to talk specifically with farmers. And honestly, if I really love to spend time speaking with farmers and hearing about what they're going through on the farm because, that appeals to a very emotional side of me growing up. So we do our best to target the whole thing, including producer groups, the extension services in each state, because as an industry, it takes really all of us to help digest information and trickle it down to the farm.
Another party that I imagine is very interested in this are people who inherit farms, but really have no idea how to run them, which must be a very common thing. Say I grew up on a farm, but I went away to college. I did something else completely. All of a sudden, my parents pass away and boom, I own a farm. And what do I do? So I could imagine very much somebody like that giving you a call.
Absolutely. I would definitely welcome those because obviously capital gains is not an issue after you inherit it because you get the step-up basis. Disclaimer, I'm not a CPA. However, you get the step-up basis, and then if you want to contribute your farm to the farmland fund, you're able to stay invested in farmland without having to manage it and deal with the situations that come up that may not be in your wheelhouse. We have people set up to help us with that with Farmers National, And then you get the advantage of continuing to be invested in what's happening to this precious asset of American farmland.
Also, I imagine, my parents spent their lives building this farm, building an identity for it. And
Yep.
that might be something I want to preserve as opposed to just selling it off to a third party. And, that's the end of it. This way, I'm still involved. The family's still involved. I could really see that being appealing.
Absolutely. You could still take your family out there and have a picnic on the land if you want to. You could go tell kids where grandpa grew up, all of that stuff, because it's going to continue to remain in operation.
That's where I think, the word legacy is an important part of the name of this fund. And that's very different than selling it.
Absolutely. And the legacy is, if you talk to these farmers, farmers are very traditional. They're very proud of their families. They're very proud of their background, and they should be. I am. I'm a product of that. Because of that, we've really put a conscious effort of making a flexible fund that can accommodate a number of situations, because not everybody's situation is the same, and still remain invested in farmland, still have an interest in the crop, and still be able to drive by and see your farm in operation.
You talked about how farmland, it's kind of the oldest business. It's been around forever. There's a lot of this history and a lot of this tradition that goes into farming. There's a lot of stability in this kind of investment, but we all know trends affect businesses of all types. Are there any trends that you see emerging in the farmland investment sector that farmers and people who are related to farmers and have their finances, well-being, or family tied to this type of work should pay attention to in the investment sector?
I think it's a great question, Chuck, because when I look at the farm, especially where interest rates are right now, when interest rates were near zero and I was lending money on operating credit at 2 and 3%, it made a lot of sense. The historical average on farmland last 20 or 30 years has been a 7.2% return on assets. My concern is right now, if you're borrowing money to farm and it's costing you 8 or 9% on your line of credit, and then the return on assets is 7.2, before you even get to thinking about making a land payment, before you get to thinking about making an equipment payment, cattle or whatever else, you're already underwater 1 or 2%. There's really not a lot of options out there to help mitigate that right now. Whenever you're kind of getting out on an island and the state of agriculture has become so variable. The highs are super high. Like 2011, we had astronomical corn prices that were spurred by an ethanol boom. And then we've had the bottom fallout 2 years later. Input prices continue to go up. When you look at this price of seed, the price of chemical, and all of those things that are kind of starting to pile in there. And then you look at land prices and equipment prices. All of these things are increasing. But if you look at the 40-year average of commodity prices, they're roughly right in line with the 40-year average. So prices are not going up significantly, but the cost of production is. So from an economic standpoint, you really only have two options. You got to employ economies of scale or economies of size. Well, scaling up is what is causing some of this. Economies of size there's those barriers to entry we talked about at the very beginning. You've got to be able to have that money and that equity available to buy that land, and you better hope your crops continue to do well to pay down pretty aggressively, especially in these high interest rates. So if I was going to make a recommendation to the farming community as a whole, to people who own farmland, is you really need to understand your numbers. You need to understand them to a granular standpoint, and not just today. You need to be looking out 5 and 10 years down the road, because the pressure that the farms are going to feel is going to increase, because we're trying to meet a world demand for food that is unprecedented, and it's going to get more and more difficult. And, you have things like what happened in Ukraine last year and a half, 2 years. That took a huge agricultural player, really two, off of the map, and it kind of pushed the pressure back onto the rest of the ag community to pick up the slack. And so a lot of things happen in that process, and we're going to continue to have these things pop up, but you're going to have a plan in place. You're going to have to be looking down the road, and you need to have good bankers, you need to have good CPAs. You have good lawyers and good estate planners helping you through all of this.
Wow. Well said.
All right. Well, Lance, it's been a pleasure talking with you about all this. It's a lot to take in, and it's a wild thing you guys are doing, but it sounds like something very important and valuable, and it speaks very strongly to me as a great way for people to be smart with their legacy, with their succession, and pass it on. So for those interested in exploring these kind of opportunities with SFM, what are some of the next steps that they should take?
Just give me a call. My cell phone is everywhere, so feel free to jump on our website. You'll see it. Just look up for Lance Weaver, and I'll be there ready to answer any kind of questions I can. And if I need a professional, we've got professionals on staff to help you answer those questions, CPAs, lawyers, anything else that you might need. www.legacyfarmlandtrust.com.
Okay, got that, everybody? So
Excellent.
go to that website.
Yep, and we will link to all of that in the show notes or in the YouTube description if you're watching us there. We're getting some really positive feedback on the show so far, so we're excited to follow along and see where it goes. Lance, again, thank you so much for being here today, and thanks to the watchers, listeners, wherever you are, for liking, sharing, subscribing, passing this along to your friends if you think it's useful. If you know somebody in the farming industry that you think this episode would be valuable to, please send it their way. As always, we want to thank you for joining us. Until next time, take care.
Thanks for listening to Essential Estate Experts, presented by Screenfire Media. Please remember to like, subscribe, ring the bell on YouTube, and rate us 5 stars on your favorite podcast app. It really helps. For more information, please visit screenfiremedia.com. Essential Estate Experts is copyright Screenfire Media, all rights reserved.